There's a formula. This math formula computes the total number of relationship configurations possible for a given number of people, assuming that everyone can be involved with everyone else, and there are 2 or more people in the group. As I said, most poly groups rarely get above a handful, and it's also not common to have every person in the group be equally romantically involved with everyone else. But most people are friends, or at least friendly, with most other people in the group. So it is important to understand that everyone in the group does relate to everyone else to some degree. The formula and the answers it comes up with are mostly for fun. No one really does the math seriously or remembers the total number of relationships possible. But the formula does serve a very important function. And that's to remind us that we affect many other people with our actions. But as I implied earlier, that's not strictly a poly issue. Any family or group of friends who interact together will face scheduling and personality compatibility issues. It's not a poly issue, it's a people issue. Monogamous people have these sorts of issues too. Large families, people with close-knit social groups who organize group gatherings, parties, trips, and so forth. Everyone's feelings have to be consulted, everyone's schedules have to be coordinated, and everyone's preferences have to be taken into account, and compromises have to be made. It's really no more complicated than social monogamous people. Except for the sex, some people might say. With all those people having romantic relationships with each other, we do have to address the sexual issues. For instance, how do poly people stay safe? Polyamorous people, for the most part, try to be very well educated about sexual health and safety and the risks involved. Communication is the #1 rule to poly relationships, and sex is no exception. Many people have frank and candid discussions about their sexual history and their current medical status. Each group has their own guidelines in place for when and how any individual can take a new sexual partner. Poly people make agreements like fluid bonding and condom contracts, which are strict agreements on when to use condoms and when it's appropriate not to. Poly people also often get tested for STDs regularly, and it's very common to share those test results with current and potential partners. Poly people tend to take their responsibility to their partners very seriously. As the formula illustrates, there are a lot of people who are affected by our individual decisions. Because of the awareness of how our actions affect so many other people, I've found that there is actually a greater understanding of sexual health within the poly community than within our society in general. Very rarely are monogamous people encouraged to discuss their sexual history or medical records on a date with a new partner. Many people are just too uncomfortable to talk about how many partners they've ever had, or to ask to see someone's test results before having sex. And many people are not satisfied with sexual activity that does not include intercourse, fluid transfer, or genital contact, unlike some poly people who do place varying degrees of limitations on their relationships for a variety of reasons. Paul R. Abramson and Stephen D. Pinkerton point out in their book, With Pleasure, Thoughts on the Nature of Human Sexuality, that it's actually safer to have sexual relationships with several known, responsible, long-term partners at once than to have sexual relationships with one person at a time whose status or history is unknown. And they provide complex mathematical formulas like this one to illustrate how that's so. For example, there's actually an organization within the porn industry, sort of like a union, that provides regular HIV testing and promotes regular condom use, among other things, and many of the biggest companies self-regulate with mandatory HIV tests and condom use. Between 1998, when AIM was founded, and 2010, only 9 performers tested positive for HIV, 4 of which occurred in 2004, when an actor had unprotected sex for a film in Brazil, where they don't regulate the industry, and ended up infecting 3 coworkers out of a total of 35 potentially exposed, because they used an older version of the HIV test that had a longer detection window than the current method. None of the other 5 performers who have tested positive since AIM was founded contracted HIV while working, meaning that the partners they got it from were not as strictly regulated as the porn actors. That's over 4,000 videos made each year in an industry of an estimated 1,200 sex workers. Only 3 people caught HIV from AIM-regulated coworkers in 12 years, and those because of a test with a long detection window that's no longer used. Porn actors average about 12 different partners per month, compared to the general public, which averages 2 or less per month, and yet their incidence rate is way lower than the general public when they comply with the industry recommendations. The rigorous testing standards and open medical records policy of AIM have resulted in a significantly lower chance of acquiring HIV than the general public. Within the poly community, rigorous testing standards and openly discussing medical history can result in lower incidences of STD transmission. In addition, poly people, on average, don't actually have significantly higher numbers of partners in their sexual history as the average serial monogamist. I personally know more polyamorists in their 30s and 40s who have had less than 10 sexual partners than I do monogamists. This is a blank template for the Sexual Health and History Disclosure Form, which is a convenient form for gathering all the data anyone would need for a complete picture of their sexual health and status. Not all poly people actually fill this form out and give it to their partners, but it is a great tool for giving you an idea of the kinds of information that poly people often disclose to potential partners, and the kinds of information that all sexually active adults should be keeping track of in their own records. I actually do fill this out, and I send blank ones to anyone I'm considering as a new partner to have them fill out, as do several of my partners and friends. One of these forms is included in the handout, and there's a link on the Safe Sex page of this website where you can download a PDF on your computer for a digital exchange, or print and fill out by hand. Even if you do not print out and exchange the actual form, and even if you're not polyamorous, I highly recommend keeping a copy for your own records to record your own sexual health.
You and me and her simultaneous, you and me and you simultaneous.